She grabbed the child's arm so hard the little girl stumbled. "What are you doing in here?" Camille's voice came out low and sharp, the kind of sound that didn't need volume to cut. "I told you, you do not come into this room when I have guests. Do you understand me?" Leia, 3 years old, in her favorite blue dress, didn't cry. She just looked up at the woman who was supposed to become her mother. And then, slowly, without making a sound, she raised one small hand and pointed at something behind Camille. The room went still. If this story already has you feeling something, stay with it. Hit the like button, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what comes next, and drop a comment telling me what city and country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. Now let's go back to where it all began. Darian Rayhan's house was the kind of place that made people slow their cars down when they drove past it. It sat at the top of a curved private road in a quiet neighborhood outside the city, surrounded by old oak trees that had been there longer than any of the homes around them. The house itself was 4 stories of pale stone and dark wood, with tall windows that reflected the sky back at you in the morning and held the amber light of lamp glow in the evenings. The landscaping was careful without being stiff. Someone had made sure the hedges were trimmed but left the wildflower beds along the east wall to grow however they wanted. There was a fountain in the front courtyard that hadn't worked in almost 2 years, but nobody had gotten around to removing it, so it just sat there, dry and a little mossy at the base, like a reminder of something that used to matter. People who drove past that house imagined things about the life inside it. They imagined dinner parties with soft music and expensive wine, imagined a family moving through those wide halls with ease, imagined mornings where everything ran on a kind of quiet, contented schedule. The house looked like the kind of place where people were happy. That was the thing about houses like that. They were very good at looking like something. Darian had built the company himself, or close enough to himself that it counted. Rayhan Technologies started in a rented office with 6 employees, a product that half the investors he pitched to thought was solving a problem that didn't exist yet, and a lease he could barely afford. That was 11 years ago. The company now employed close to 400 people, had expanded into 3 markets, and had recently been mentioned in a profile piece in a business publication as one of the more quietly influential firms in the tech infrastructure space. Darian hadn't loved the profile. He thought it made him sound older than he was, and he told his communications manager as much, though nothing ever came of it. He was 41 years old, which he didn't think about much. He kept himself in reasonable shape, not because he was particularly disciplined about it, but because he had a bad back and his physical therapist had told him 3 years ago that if he didn't start moving his body consistently, he would regret it before 50. He had listened. He ran in the mornings when the weather allowed it, and when it didn't, he used the treadmill in the basement with the television on mute. He had met Sophia when they were both 29. She was finishing a graduate program in urban planning and had been brought in to consult on a design problem with the office space for Rayhan's second location. He had thought she was interesting before he found out she was funny, and he had found out she was funny before he understood that she was also one of the most emotionally perceptive people he had ever known. They were together for 8 years before she got sick, and she was gone 18 months after the diagnosis. Laia was born during the 2nd year of Sophia's illness, which meant that Sophia had known, in some part of herself, that she was making a particular kind of decision about timing. They had talked about it, of course, long, hard conversations in the dark, the kind you can't summarize later because so much of what they were really about was the silence between the sentences. Sophia had said, more than once, that she wasn't trying to leave Darian something to take care of. That wasn't how she thought about it. She said she just kept feeling like Laia was already there, already part of them, already waiting, and that it didn't seem right to keep her waiting any longer. Leia Rayhan arrived in the world 11 days early, screaming, with a shock of dark hair in her mother's jaw. And Darian had held her in his hands in the delivery room and felt something inside himself that he still could not put into language, even now, 2.5 years after Sophia had died. Leia was 3 years and 4 months old when Camille Fontaine moved her things into the house on the curved road. She didn't bring much at first. A few garment bags, 2 large suitcases, a set of cosmetics arranged in a soft-sided case that unfolded like a small display. She moved through the house on that first day with a kind of careful deliberateness, pausing at doorways, touching the edge of a bookshelf, running her fingers along the frame of the window in the upstairs sitting room. Darian had watched her do it and told himself it was natural. She was learning the space, making herself feel at home. That was a good thing. That was what he wanted. He had met Camille 14 months earlier at a fundraising dinner for a children's medical research foundation. She was there representing a company she worked for that did corporate event coordination, and she had handled a small logistical crisis during the event. A catering vendor who hadn't shown up with half the order, with such calm and such efficiency that the executive director had publicly thanked her at the podium. Darian had been seated 2 tables away and had watched the whole thing. After the speeches, he had introduced himself. She was 37, tall, with the kind of composed face that was difficult to read quickly. She dressed carefully, always. Not expensively, necessarily, though sometimes that too, more just precisely, like she had thought through her appearance the way other people thought through a presentation. She was charming in company, attentive in conversation, and she remembered small things about people from previous meetings in a way that felt like real interest rather than professional habit. At least at first, that was how it felt. Darian had told her about Sophia on their 3rd date, not because he had planned to, but because the conversation had gone somewhere he wasn't expecting, and it had come out before he was ready for it. He had braced himself for the particular discomfort that sometimes followed, the too careful condolences, the slightly altered rhythm of the evening. But Camille had just listened. She had asked 1 or 2 questions, not many. She hadn't immediately said how sorry she was or reached for his hand. She had just taken it in, nodded slowly, and then said, "She sounds like someone who knew what she wanted." That was all. And Darian had thought, this is a person who knows how to hold something without breaking it. He had introduced Camille to Laya 4 months into seeing her. A Saturday morning, the kitchen, deliberately low pressure. Mrs. Okafor, the nanny who had been with them since Laya was 6 weeks old, had made breakfast and then quietly made herself scarce. Camille had crouched down to Laya's level, which was the right instinct, and said hello, and Laya had stared at her for a long, unblinking moment, the way she did with most things she was trying to understand, and then reached past Camille to pick up a piece of orange from her plate. Camille had laughed at that. Darian had too. It had felt fine. Not magic, not a fairy tale instant connection, but fine, which was realistic, which was what he was aiming for. What he had not aimed for, because he had not let himself see it clearly enough to aim at it, was the way things shifted inside the house after Camille began staying there regularly. It wasn't dramatic. That was the part that made it hard to name. There were no scenes, no moments of open cruelty, nothing that could be pointed to easily and called what it was. It was subtler than that. It was Camille setting Laya's dinner plate at the far end of the table because, she said, Laya tended to spill, and it was easier for Mrs. Okafor to manage her there. It was the way she sometimes spoke to Laya, in the tone you might use on a misbehaving pet. Not mean, exactly, but without any warmth, without any recognition that there was a small person inside the small body. It was the afternoon Laya had appeared in the living room doorway with a crayon drawing in her hand, wanting to show Camille something, and Camille had said, without looking up from her phone, "Not now, sweetheart," and Laya had stood there for a full minute before padding away. Mrs. Okafor had seen it. She was 54 years old, originally from Lagos, and she had worked with children and the families of children for more than 20 years. She had a way of watching a room without appearing to watch it, and what she had been watching for the past several months had made her increasingly quiet in a way that Darian, if he had been paying attention, might have noticed. But Darian was not always paying attention. He was managing a company that was in the middle of a complicated acquisition process. He was managing the grief that hadn't gone away so much as rearranged itself into the structure of his daily life. And he was managing the fragile and effortful optimism of trying to believe he was building something good again. He was juggling, and when you're juggling, sometimes the thing that doesn't make noise is the thing that falls. Laya didn't make noise. She never had, particularly. Even as an infant, she had been unusually quiet, alert, watchful, taking things in. Sophia had called her the little scientist because of the way she examined things. A leaf, a button, a shadow on the wall, a person's face. She would look and look and look, as if the looking itself was the point. Darian had always loved this about her. He thought it meant she was deep. He didn't always think about what it meant she was absorbing. Her favorite thing in the world, the object she carried everywhere, was a stuffed elephant named Peanut. Peanut had once been gray and soft, I was now a grayish beige with one eye that didn't quite line up with the other because it had been reattached after an incident involving the laundry, and one ear that flopped differently from the other because of something that had happened during a car trip when Laya was 18 months old and the details of which nobody could remember anymore. Peanut was, objectively, a little rough-looking. Leia did not care. She would put him on the breakfast table while she ate. She would set him carefully on the edge of the bathtub while she had her bath. She would tuck him into her bed before she got in herself, with a focused seriousness, as if getting him settled was the thing that had to happen before anything else could. The blue dress was another matter. It had been Sophia's choice. A pale blue cotton dress with white smocking across the chest, bought during a shopping trip when Sophia was sick, but still strong enough to walk through a children's boutique and want things for her daughter. She had bought it 2 sizes too large because she was thinking ahead, the way she always did. And by the time Laya was the right size for it, Sophia had been gone for almost a year. Darian hadn't been sure whether to give it to her or put it away. He'd given it to her. She had taken it from him with both hands, looked at it the way she looked at things she was trying to understand, and then asked to put it on. She wore it every chance she got. She wore it until Darian had to wash it while she was sleeping and have it back in her dresser before she woke up. Because if she knew it was in the washing machine, she would be anxious until it was back. She wore it to the grocery store, to the park, to a neighbor's birthday party where she had been wildly overdressed. She wore it sometimes with nothing else matching, just the blue dress and whatever shoes Mrs. Okafor could get on her feet that morning. And Darian never said anything because there was something about the way she wore it that he understood without being able to explain. The night before the gathering, Laya had found Peanut on the floor where she had dropped him and put him back in the bed. And when Darian had come in to say goodnight, she was lying with the elephant on her chest, her dark eyes open in the dim light. "Daddy," she said. "Yeah, Bug? Is the lady staying?" He sat down on the edge of her mattress. The room smelled like the lavender soap Mrs. Okafor always used in the bath. "Camille, she's sleeping here tonight, yeah." Leia looked at the ceiling. "She doesn't like Peanut." Darian was quiet for a second. "She hasn't spent much time with Peanut yet." "I showed her." Leia said this matter-of-factly, not with complaint in it. She looked at her phone. He didn't say anything immediately. He smoothed the blanket near her shoulder. He wanted to say the right thing, but the right thing wasn't obvious to him, and he had a rule with himself. Something Sophia had actually made him promise early on, that he would not make promises to Leia that he wasn't sure he could keep, even small ones, especially small ones. "You okay?" he said finally. She turned and looked at him with those eyes that took everything in. "I'm okay," she said. And then, "Are you okay?" He leaned down and kissed her forehead. "I'm working on it," he said, which was the truest thing he could offer. He thought about that conversation as he dressed the next morning. He turned it over while he made coffee, while he reviewed the afternoon's agenda, while Camille sat at the kitchen island in a silk blouse and answered emails on her laptop, and the house gathered itself around the day ahead. The gathering that evening was not a party, exactly. Camille's word for it was a small dinner, which turned out to mean 12 people in the formal dining room and 4 more in the sitting room, with catering from a company Camille had used professionally before, and a playlist she had put together on a portable speaker that cost more than most people spent on furniture. She had organized all of it. She had told Darian it would be good for them, a way to announce, without announcement, that the house was alive again, that there was something new here worth being a part of. He had agreed. He had thought it was probably true. By 7 o'clock, the house was full of voices and the smell of good food and the particular sound of people who are comfortable enough with one another to laugh. Darian moved through it with the practiced ease of a man who had been hosting this kind of thing for years. He refreshed drinks, he caught threads of conversation, he laughed at the right moments. He kept checking in the direction of the stairs. He told himself it was fine. Laya was with Mrs. Okafor, upstairs, in her room. Everything was handled. He stepped away at some point to take a call that couldn't wait. One of his operations managers, a situation at a server facility 2 states over that needed a decision made before morning. He took the call in the hallway near the back of the house, facing a window that looked out at the garden. He was on it for maybe 12 minutes. He was almost off when he heard Camille's voice from the front room. It cut right through the background noise, so not because it was especially loud, but because it had a quality to it that his body understood before his mind did. Sharp. cold. The kind of sound that comes from someone who has stopped pretending. What are you doing in here? Not a question, a command dressed as a question. I told you. You do not come into this room when I have guests. Do you understand me? He was already moving before the call ended. He pressed the phone against his chest, stepped around the corner, came into the arched entrance of the formal sitting room. He stopped. Leia was standing in the middle of the room in her blue dress. Her hair was loose, the way it got loose when she'd been sleeping, and she was holding Peanut against her chest with both arms. 12 people were arranged around the room in the way people arrange themselves at a gathering. Clusters near the windows, 2 on the settee, 1 standing near the mantel with a drink. And every single one of them was now completely still, looking at the child and the woman standing over her. Camille was bent slightly forward, in the way adults bend when they're trying to bring themselves down to a child's level, but aren't really committing to it. Her hand was on Leia's arm. Darian could see from where he stood that the grip was firm enough to matter. Leia was not crying. She was looking up at Camille with that particular stillness of hers, the scientific stillness, the kind that meant she was taking something in and would be keeping it. And then, without any preparation, without looking away from Camille's face, she raised one small hand, the hand that wasn't holding Peanut, and pointed. She pointed behind Camille. She pointed at her father standing in the doorway. The room turned. 12 pairs of eyes moved from the child's outstretched finger to the man in the archway, and in the 2 seconds it took for all of that to happen, Darian watched Camille's face change, watched the sharpness in it not disappear but recalculate, watched her let go of Leia's arm, watched her stand up straight and attempt to rearrange herself into something more comfortable. Darian, she said. Her voice had shifted. Even in one word you could hear it. He didn't respond. He was looking at his daughter. Leia was still looking at him, her hand still raised, Peanut pressed against her chest. Her expression was almost impossibly composed for a 3-year-old. She wasn't asking him to do something. She wasn't frightened. She was just pointing, like she had decided that this was the right moment for her father to see what was in front of him, and she had made the decision calmly and completely. He crossed the room. He went to his daughter first. He crouched down to her level and looked at her face and put his hand gently on the back of her head, the way he always did when he was taking her measure. "Hey, Bug," he said quietly. She put her arms around his neck. He felt her breathe. He stood up, holding her, and turned to face the room. He met Camille's eyes. He didn't say anything in that moment. There was nothing to say in that moment, not with 12 people watching, not with Leia's face pressed against his shoulder. He just looked at her long enough for her to understand that whatever calculation she had been making about the evening had changed. Then he said to the room quietly and politely, "Excuse us for a minute," and he carried his daughter out of the room and up the stairs. And behind them the gathering continued, awkwardly, because that was the only thing it could do. Mrs. Okafor met him at the top of the stairs. Her face said she already knew. Her face said she had been waiting for him to know too. "How long?" he said. She folded her hands in front of her. She didn't pretend not to understand the question. "A while," she said. "I should have told you sooner." Leia was already reaching for her door handle, wanting to get back to her room, wanting to get back to whatever she'd been doing before the night pulled her toward the stairs. She pushed her door open and went in, and Darian stood in the hallway for a moment, Peanut still in his hands because she had left the elephant with him, left it with him the way she sometimes did when she wanted him to hold something for her. He looked down at the worn gray stuffed animal, one eye slightly off, one ear with a different weight than the other. He thought about what Camille had said. He thought about the grip on Leia's arm. He thought about the words, "You do not come into this room," and the way they had been delivered, like a correction to a mistake that had been made many times before. He thought about his daughter raising her hand in a room full of strangers and pointing, not to accuse, not out of fear, but simply to show him something. He stood there in the hallway and held Peanut and looked at nothing, and the sound of the gathering drifted up from below like a conversation he was no longer part of, and he stayed there for a long time before going back down the stairs to deal with what was waiting for him. He stood at the bottom of the stairs for a moment before he went back into the room, and in that moment he was aware of the sound of his own breathing, the faint music from the speaker, the low resumed murmur of conversation that had picked itself back up, the way conversation always does, because people are uncomfortable with silence and will fill it with almost anything. He went back in. Camille was standing near the window with a glass of wine, talking to a couple Darian vaguely recognized from a charity board she sat on. She was composed again. That was fast, he thought. That was very fast. She turned when she heard him come in and gave him a small, careful smile. The kind that was meant to say, "We're fine, everything is fine, let's not make this into something." He did not return the smile in the same register. He gave her enough to get through the rest of the evening without creating a scene in front of their guests, and then he moved to the other side of the room and stayed there. For the next 90 minutes, he did what was required of him. He talked. He listened. He accepted a refill he didn't particularly want. He laughed once at a story someone told about a disaster at a company retreat, and the laugh was genuine enough that he didn't feel like a fraud for having it. But the whole time, some part of him was standing in that hallway upstairs, holding a worn-out stuffed elephant and staring at nothing. The guests left in stages, the way they always do. The early departers around 9:30, making their apologies and collecting their coats, followed by the couple who always stay too long no matter the occasion. And then finally, around 11, the last stragglers into the cold night air with promises about doing this again soon. Darian closed the door. The caterers had already cleared most of the dishes. The house was quiet in the particular way it gets after a lot of people have just left it, like a room that's holding its breath. Camille was in the kitchen, leaning against the counter with her wine glass, scrolling her phone. She looked up when he came in. "That went well," she said. "People seem to enjoy themselves." He pulled out one of the stools and sat down across from her. He put his hands flat on the counter. He didn't know exactly how he wanted to start this, but he knew he needed to start it tonight, not tomorrow, not after he'd slept on it, and let the edges soften the way edges always do if you give them enough time. "What happened with Laya?" he said. Not a question. Camille set the phone face down on the counter. She did it slowly, which meant she'd been expecting this and was collecting herself. "She wandered in," she said. "I was in the middle of a conversation with 3 people. It wasn't the right moment." "She's 3. "I know how old she is, Darian." "Then you know she doesn't understand not the right moment. She just knows she wanted to find you and she did." Camille looked at him steadily. "I wasn't harsh. I redirected her." "You had your hand on her arm." A small pause. "She was pulling at my dress." He didn't say anything to that. He just looked at her and let the silence do some of the work because he had learned over years of negotiations and difficult conversations that sometimes the most useful thing you could say was nothing at all. Camille shifted. "Look," she said, her voice modulating, going towards something more reasonable. "I know it looked bad. I know the timing was terrible, but I had a full room of people and a 3-year-old suddenly appearing in the middle of a conversation I was managing, and I handled it badly. I'll admit that." She paused. "I'll apologize to her tomorrow." "She won't remember an apology the way you mean it." "Then I'll find another way to make it up to her." He studied his hands on the counter. The skin across his knuckles was dry. He kept meaning to do something about that. "Mrs. Okafor said this has been happening." The temperature in the room changed, not dramatically, just by a degree or two, the way it does when someone who has been standing in one position shifts their weight. "What exactly did Mrs. Okafor say?" "She said Laya has been pulling back, that she used to try to connect with you, and she's stopped." "Mrs. Okafor," Camille said carefully, "is Laya's nanny. She has a particular perspective. She's known that child since she was 6 weeks old. And I've known her for over a year. I also have a perspective." "Then share it with me." Camille was quiet for a moment. She turned the wine glass in a slow circle on the countertop. "I think the transition has been harder than either of us anticipated. I think Laya is a complicated child who is still processing a loss that is enormous for someone her age. And I think that sometimes, not always, but sometimes, Mrs. Okafor conflates Laya's grief with something I'm doing. Laya told me you looked at your phone when she tried to show you a drawing. I don't remember that. That's maybe part of the problem." Something moved across Camille's face. Not guilt, exactly. More like irritation at being pressed in a way she hadn't planned for. She picked up her wine glass, considered it, set it back down without drinking. "I'm not Sophia," she said. "I was never going to be Sophia. I think sometimes what you're actually asking me to do is be someone I cannot be for that little girl. I'm not asking you to be her mother. Aren't you? I'm asking you to be kind to her. That's a different thing. Camille pressed her lips together. She looked somewhere past his shoulder for a moment. When she looked back at him, her eyes were clearer, like she had made a small decision. "You're right," she said. "I should be more patient. I will be." Her voice was even, considered. "I know this evening was not my best moment. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. But I also don't think one bad evening should define—" "It's not one evening," he said. She stopped. "That's what I'm telling you. Mrs. Okafor didn't come to me with one incident. She came to me with a pattern. And the thing is, now that I'm hearing it, I can feel it too. I can feel it in the way Laya moves around you. She's not scared of you. She's just not there. She's just gone quiet in the way kids go quiet when they've stopped expecting something." Camille was very still. "She's 3 years old," Darian said again. "She can't advocate for herself. She can't come to me and say, 'Here's what's happening, and here's how it makes me feel.' All she can do is go quiet or point at things and hope that I'm paying enough attention to understand." He felt something tighten in his chest. "And I have not been paying enough attention. That's on me. I know that." For a moment, just a moment, he thought something real was going to happen. He thought Camille was going to put down the glass and come around the counter and say something that was actually honest, the way she had been honest in early conversations when she had said things he hadn't expected, and they had caught him off guard in a good way. He thought maybe they were about to get somewhere. "I think," Camille said slowly, "that you're exhausted. I think you're running a company and grieving a wife and raising a child and managing an engagement, and it's a lot. And I think tonight sent you into a spiral that's bigger than what the moment actually deserves." She paused. "I love you. I want this to work. I'm willing to put in more effort with Laya, but I need you to give me some grace too." He looked at her for a long moment. She meant it, or she meant enough of it that she believed she meant it, which wasn't exactly the same thing. "Okay," he said. "We'll talk more tomorrow." She nodded. She picked up her wine glass and walked toward the hallway, and he sat at the kitchen counter alone after she left and stayed there until the light above the stove was the only light on in the house. He went upstairs late. He checked on Laya, which he did every night without exception. It was one of his non-negotiable things, the last check, the push of the door to make sure she was okay. She was deeply asleep, curled on her side with one arm thrown across the pillow where Peanut usually was. He looked for the elephant and found him on the floor beside the bed, fallen off sometime after she'd drifted out. He picked Peanut up and set him carefully beside her arm, close enough that she could reach him without waking up. He stood there in the dark and watched his daughter breathe. She breathed the way children breathe in deep sleep, with her whole body, a rhythm that was almost too complete for someone so small. Her lips were slightly parted. She had a small crease on her cheek from the pillow seam. She looked exactly like what she was, which was a 3-year-old girl who had walked downstairs in her blue dress to find a person and been told she wasn't supposed to be there, and then had pointed at her father and then had gone to bed. He sat down carefully on the edge of the mattress. He sat there for a while. He thought about the 8 months since Camille had started spending real time in this house. He was going through it now, actually going through it rather than managing it, and what he found when he went through it honestly was more than he had been willing to carry before tonight. The dinner with the plate at the far end of the table. The morning Laya had appeared in her blue dress at the top of the stairs while Camille was on a video call, and Camille had mouthed "not now" in a way that stopped Laya mid-step. The afternoon Laya had said, "Daddy, she doesn't like my pictures," and he had said, "That's not true, she's just busy," and Laya had nodded and accepted this and gone back to her room. He had said, "That's not true, she's just busy." He had said it and believed it because he needed to believe it, because the alternative required him to do something hard, and he had too many hard things already and not enough energy to take on one more. But Laya had known. She had known before he did, which was not surprising once you really thought about it, because she had been there, in the house, every day, while he was running a company and grieving and not seeing clearly. He put his hand gently on her shoulder. Not to wake her, just to be there. In the morning, the house had the feel of a room after a storm, not destroyed, but rearranged. The air was different. Camille made coffee and brought him a cup without being asked, which was a form of apology, and he accepted it, which was a form of patience. They talked about the schedule for the week. She mentioned a meeting she had on Thursday. He mentioned a call he needed to take early. It was all manageable. It was all functional. And underneath it, the conversation from the night before sat like something they had agreed to leave in a drawer for now. Mrs. Okafor arrived at 8:30. She came in through the side door the way she always did, and she had Laya's breakfast sorted and her clothes laid out before Darian had finished his coffee. She did not mention the night before. She was not the kind of woman who would bring it up without being asked. He asked. He waited until Camille had gone upstairs to change, and then he asked Mrs. Okafor to sit down for a minute, and she did, folding her hands in her lap with the particular stillness of someone who has been waiting for a conversation to happen. "Tell me what you've seen," he said. She took a breath. "I didn't want to bring it to you before now," she said. "I kept thinking it might change, that things were still new and there was adjustment happening and it would find its level. But it hasn't found its level." She looked at him directly. She had a direct way of looking at people, which he had always valued. "Miss Camille is not unkind to Laya in ways that are obvious. I want to be clear about that. There's no shouting, there's no... She doesn't mistreat her, but she also doesn't see her." "What does that mean, doesn't see her?" "It means Laya will come into a room, and Miss Camille will look at her the way you look at a piece of furniture. You register it's there, but it's not something you're interested in, and Laya felt that immediately." Mrs. Okafor paused. Children that age feel those things before they can name them. Leia started trying, initially. She'd bring things to show her, drawings, the elephant, little things she found outside. And the response was always deflection. Not cruelty, just not interest. How long ago did Leia stop trying? Mrs. Okafor thought. Probably 3 months back, maybe a bit more. She stopped bringing Miss Camille things. She stopped going into rooms where Miss Camille was if she didn't have to. She paused again, and this one was heavier. "Last week, Leia asked me if Miss Camille was going to be her new mama." Darian felt the question land in him, somewhere between his sternum and his throat. "What did you tell her?" "I told her that was a question for her daddy." Mrs. Okafor looked at him with something that was not judgment exactly, but was not entirely without it either. "She said she didn't want to make you sad." He put his hands flat on the table. They were not quite steady. "She said she didn't want to make you sad," he repeated. "She's trying to take care of you," Mrs. Okafor said quietly. "She's been doing it for a while. You were so broken after her mother, and she's a perceptive child, and she could see it, so she learned to be quiet about the things that hurt her, because she was worried about adding to what you were already carrying." He sat with this for what felt like a long time, but was probably 45 seconds. The kitchen was warm. Through the window he could see the oak trees and the dry fountain and the wildflower beds along the east wall. "There's something else," Mrs. Okafor said. He looked at her. She got up from the table. She went to the counter and opened the drawer where she kept a small basket of things she used for Laya's art projects. Crayons, safety scissors, a few stickers. From under the basket she pulled a folded piece of construction paper, pale yellow, the kind from the package he'd bought at the craft store months ago. She brought it to the table and set it in front of him. He unfolded it. It was a crayon drawing. The execution was what you'd expect from a 3-year-old. Rough circles for heads, stick bodies, colors that didn't quite stay in the lines. But the picture was readable. There were 2 figures, a small one and a tall one, standing close together, and between them a rounded gray shape that was clearly meant to be Peanut. No third figure, no house, no background, just the 2 of them. At the top of the page, in the labored block letters that Darian had been practicing with her, it said, "Me and Papa." He looked at it for a long time. Mrs. Okafor sat back down quietly. "When did she make this?" he said. "About 6 weeks ago. I found it under her mattress. She'd hidden it." "Why would she hide it?" Mrs. Okafor chose her words carefully. "I think she didn't want Miss Camille to see it and feel left out. And I think she didn't want you to see it and feel sad about what it was saying." She paused. "But she made it. She made it, and she kept it." Darian pressed his thumb lightly against the edge of the paper. The crayon was slightly waxy under his touch. He thought about his daughter sitting at her little art table, working on this picture with the deliberate concentration she brought to everything, deciding what to draw and what not to draw, hiding it under her mattress because she was 3 years old and already trying to manage the emotional landscape of the adults around her. He folded the picture along its original crease and held it. "I need to make some decisions," he said. Mrs. Okafor nodded. She didn't say anything else. She was not a woman who needed to fill silences with reassurance, which was one of the reasons he trusted her. He put the drawing in the breast pocket of his shirt, close to him, and went to find his daughter. Leia was in her room, at the art table, making something new. She was wearing the blue dress over a long-sleeved shirt because the morning was cool, and she had Peanut tucked between her side and the back of the chair. She looked up when her father came in, and then immediately looked back down at her work with the focused disinterest of someone who is in the middle of something important. He sat down on the little footstool beside the table, which was too small for him and made his knees come up at an uncomfortable angle, but he sat on it anyway because it was at her level. "What are you making?" he asked. "A house," she said. She held up the paper to show him. It was vague, green and brown and orange, no real architectural detail, but it had a warmth to it, a color. "It has a tree." "I see the tree." "And a bird." He squinted. "Where's the bird?" She pointed with her crayon to a small brown mark near the top corner. "There." "Okay, yeah, good bird." She went back to drawing. He watched her. She had a way of holding the crayon too tight when she was concentrating. Her whole small fist wrapped around it, her tongue just barely visible at the corner of her mouth. "Laya," he said. "I love you." She didn't look up immediately. She added a careful orange mark to the right side of the house. "I know," she said. And then she looked at him and said, "I love you more." It was a thing she'd said to him 100 times, a call and response they had developed without deciding to, and he always said the same thing back. Not possible. He said it now. She gave him a satisfied look and went back to the house and the bird and the tree. He stayed on the footstool, too big for it, knees at an awkward angle, and watched his daughter draw for a while. And the morning light came through the curtains and fell across the art table and across her hands, and across the yellow construction paper. And outside the door, the rest of the house was doing whatever it was doing, and in here it was just this. He knew what he needed to do. He had known it, if he was honest, before the drawing, and before Mrs. Okafor's words, and before the conversation the night before. He had known it from the moment he stood in the entrance to that sitting room and watched his 3-year-old daughter raise her hand in a room full of strangers and point at him. Not in fear, not in anger, just with that particular clarity she had, that way she had of seeing the thing clearly and pointing at it and trusting that someone would understand. She had trusted that he would understand. He was going to have to prove that she was right to. He didn't have the conversation with Camille that morning, or the next morning. He let 2 days pass, which was not avoidance so much as it was the particular kind of patience he had learned from years of making decisions that couldn't be undone. The understanding that if you moved too fast on something with real weight to it, you ended up making the decision you needed to make twice, because the first time you did it wrong. He went to work. He sat in meetings. He reviewed numbers from the acquisition process and asked questions of his legal team and approved a budget revision that he'd been putting off for 6 weeks. He ate lunch at his desk twice, which he hated doing but did anyway. He came home both evenings at a reasonable hour, which was something he had not been consistent about and which he was aware of, and both evenings he sat with Leia through her bath and her dinner and her bedtime routine. And he read her the same picture book she'd been requesting for 11 consecutive nights, because once Leia decided she liked something, she wanted it reliably, without variation, and he did not rush it. Camille was present in the house during those 2 days in a way that felt different from before, quieter, more careful. She brought him coffee in the mornings. She asked about his day in the evenings in a way that was genuinely attentive. Once, she came into Leia's playroom while Leia was building something out of large foam blocks, and she sat on the edge of the couch and watched, and after a minute she said, What are you building?" And Leia said, "A spaceship," without looking up, and Camille said, "It's a good spaceship," and Leia said, "I know," and that was the extent of it. But Camille had tried. He had watched from the doorway and registered that she had tried. It would have been easy, at that point, to let trying be enough. He had been letting trying be enough for months, which was part of how they'd gotten here. On the 3rd evening after the gathering, after Leia was in bed and the house was quiet, he poured 2 glasses of water, not wine, just water, which set a tone, and he sat across from Camille at the kitchen table and he said, "I need to talk to you about something, and I need you to let me get through it before you respond." She looked at the 2 glasses of water and then at him. She nodded. He had thought about how to start this. He had rehearsed a couple of versions in his head during a commute and abandoned both of them because they sounded like opening statements rather than conversations. In the end, he just said, "I've been thinking about what you said the other night, about Sophia." Camille was still. "You said you're not Sophia and you were never going to be her. And that's true. I never asked you to be." He looked at the table, not at her. "But I've been going back through the last 8 months and trying to be honest about what I've been seeing versus what I've been telling myself I was seeing. And I think those two things are pretty different." "Darian, let me finish." He said it without sharpness. She stopped. "Leia has been trying to reach you for most of the time you've been in this house. She brought you drawings. She tried to show you Peanut. She looked for you in rooms. And the response she got, consistently, was nothing that felt like welcome." He paused. "I know you didn't mean it that way. I know you're not a cruel person. But Leia doesn't have the ability to parse intention. She just has the experience of being looked past, over and over, by someone who was becoming part of her home. And she adjusted to that. She stopped trying. She started going quiet." He finally looked up. "A 3-year-old should not have to decide to go quiet. That's not something she should be carrying." Camille was looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Not defensive, not soft, somewhere in between. "I found a drawing she'd hidden under her mattress," he said. "It was just the two of us, me and her. She'd made it 6 weeks ago and hidden it because she didn't want you to feel left out, and she didn't want me to feel sad about what it meant." Something shifted in Camille's face. "She's 3, he said. "She was managing all of that, at 3, because she'd learned that everyone around her had something fragile in them, and she needed to be careful." He stopped. He could feel the tightness in his chest that came when he got close to the thing he was actually most angry about, which was not Camille but himself. "That's my failure. I should have been paying closer attention. I should have seen it sooner." "You're being very hard on yourself," Camille said quietly. "Maybe. But I'm also being accurate." He let a moment pass. "I need to ask you something directly, and I need you to answer me directly." She nodded. "When you picture the next few years, this house, the marriage, the life we've been talking about building, when you picture it honestly, not the version you'd describe to someone else, but the version that's actually in your head, is Leia in it? Not on the edges, not being managed. In it, actually in it." Camille looked at him for a long moment. He watched the thing that was working behind her eyes. She was someone who thought quickly, who usually had an answer ready before the question finished landing, and the fact that she was taking time now told him something. "I think," she said slowly, "that I've been approaching Leia the way I approach most things, practically, logistically, figuring out what needs to happen and making sure it happens." She paused. I didn't grow up in a house where children were the center of everything. My family was more, she moved her hand slightly, structured. You made your contributions to the household. You didn't disrupt the functioning of it. Leia's not disrupting anything. I know that logically." She stopped herself. "What I'm trying to say is that I think there's a gap between how I relate to her and how she needs to be related to, and I'm aware of it." "How long have you been aware of it?" A longer pause this time. "A while." He sat with that. Outside, something moved in the oak trees, probably the wind, probably just the branches shifting, and the sound of it came faintly through the window. "I need something more from you than awareness," he said. "I need to know that she's not going to grow up in this house feeling like a complication, feeling like the part of the life that has to be worked around." Camille looked down at the glass of water. She turned it in a slow circle. When she looked up, her expression had changed into something that was more honest than what she usually showed him, and less comfortable for her. "I want to give you that," she said. "I want to be able to tell you that and mean it completely. I'm being honest with you because you asked me to be honest. I'm not sure I know how to do what you're describing, not naturally. I could try harder. I fully intend to try harder. But I don't know if trying harder is the same as what she actually needs." He had not expected her to say that. He had expected a promise, or a defense, and he'd gotten neither. He'd gotten something that was much harder to respond to. "That's the most honest thing you've said to me in a while," he said. She gave a small, tired smile that didn't have any performance in it. "I know. I'm sorry it took this long." They sat in the quiet kitchen, and neither of them said anything for a minute. And in the silence, Darian felt the shape of what was coming taking form. Not with pleasure, not with anything he could call relief, just with the weight of something that had been true for longer than he'd wanted to admit. He did not end things that night. He was not impulsive by nature, and he wanted to be certain, and there was a part of him that still loved Camille, loved the idea of what they'd been trying to make. And he did not want to destroy that carelessly, even if it needed to be destroyed. What happened instead was the conversation the following morning. He had not planned it. He had come downstairs early, couldn't sleep, hadn't really slept well in days. And Camille was already up, sitting in the living room with her coffee, on a call with someone from her work that she was taking at 7 in the morning because a client in a different time zone needed something. She held up a finger when he appeared, the universal gesture for just 1 minute, and he nodded and went to make his coffee and stood at the counter and listened to her half of the conversation through the archway. She was good at it. She was always good at it. Clear, calm, in control of the information without sounding controlling. She solved the client's problem in about 4 minutes and ended the call with a smooth cheerfulness that he recognized as professional warmth, which was real enough but also calibrated, always exactly as much as the situation required and not 1 degree more. He thought about the foam block spaceship. Leia had not calibrated anything. She had built something and called it a spaceship and known it was good without requiring anyone to confirm it. Camille came into the kitchen to refill her cup. She looked tired, not exhausted, just the ordinary tired of someone who had slept 4 hours fewer than they needed. She gave him a small good morning look that acknowledged last night without reopening it. "Can I ask you something?" he said. She leaned against the counter with her mug. "Sure." "If we got married, if the wedding happened and we were here, the three of us, long term, what would you see as the right arrangement for Laia? Long term?" She didn't flinch from the question. She considered it. "I think she'd benefit from more structure as she gets older," she said. "I've actually been doing some research on schools. There's a program upstate, excellent academic reputation. Starts at 4. Boarding isn't available that young, obviously, but by 7 or 8 it would be a real option. And boarding school," he said. She heard his tone and recalibrated. Not dismissively. There are children who thrive in that environment, academically, socially. It's not about shipping her off. It's about finding the setting where she can... Camille. He said her name flat. She's 3. She hides drawings under her mattress because she's scared the people around her have too much to carry. She sleeps with a stuffed elephant that's missing an eye, and she wears her mother's dress every chance she gets because it's the closest thing she has to her. And your long-term vision for her is a boarding school upstate when she turns 7. The kitchen went quiet. "I was trying to think practically," Camille said, but she heard herself saying it, and something in her voice dropped at the end. "I know," he said, and then, "That's the problem." He put his coffee cup in the sink. He put both hands on the edge of the counter and looked at the window and the oak trees and the dry fountain in the courtyard. He stayed like that for a moment. "I'm not going to be able to do this," he said. "Not because of last night, not because of the gathering, because of boarding school, because of the fact that when I ask you to picture her future, the picture you have in your head is one where she's somewhere else." He turned and looked at Camille. "I can't build a marriage on that. I can't bring someone into this house on that basis. She lives here. This is her home. She's not a logistical consideration." Camille set her mug down on the counter. She was very still. "So this is it," she said. It wasn't a question. "I think it has to be." She looked at him for a long moment. Her face was composed in the way it always was, but at the edges of it, around the eyes, at the corners of her mouth, something was working. He had the sense that she was not entirely surprised, and that this somehow made it worse for her rather than better. "I'm sorry," he said. And he meant it. He was sorry. He was sorry the way you're sorry when you've made a mistake that cost someone else something, even if correcting it was the right thing. "So am I," she said. She said it simply, and he believed it was simple, and he thought that maybe that was the most complete and honest exchange they'd ever had. She didn't leave that day. There were practical things that needed to happen, arrangements to be made, and she was a practical person. She worked through them the way she worked through everything, efficiently and without unnecessary drama. She made calls. She called a friend who had a spare room. She began moving her things back into the guest room so that the process could happen in stages rather than as a single rupture. Darian helped her carry a few boxes from the closet. They were not unkind to each other. It was strange, strained and a little surreal and not without sadness, but it was not unkind. Mrs. Okafor arrived at her usual time and took in the state of things with one quiet look and said nothing, and got Leia's breakfast started, and moved through the kitchen with a practiced calm that was, Darian thought, its own form of grace. Leia spent the morning in her room. She did not appear to register anything different about the day's atmosphere, which was either because she was 3 and the currents of adult tension didn't translate, or because she had already learned to move alongside those currents without disturbing them. Darian suspected it was the second thing, and the suspicion made something ache in him. He went up at lunchtime. She was on the floor with a set of wooden animals, a barn activity set Mrs. Okafor had bought her months ago, and she was arranging them with great seriousness into what appeared to be a specific order. "What's the order?" he asked, sitting down on the floor beside her. "They have to be by size," she said. "What happens if they're not by size?" She considered this. They can't find each other. He watched her move a small wooden cow next to a smaller wooden sheep. "Does the big one look after the little one?" She looked at him like this was a self-evident answer. "Yes, Daddy." He pulled her into his lap, animal set and all. She allowed this briefly and then began trying to reach the wooden pig she'd left out of the arrangement. So he leaned forward and handed it to her, and she slotted it in next to the cow and the sheep, and then tilted her head to consider whether the whole arrangement had been successful. "Leia," he said. "You know I'm always here, right? Whatever happens, whatever changes, I'm here." She was quiet for a moment, lining up a tiny wooden duck at the end of the row. Then she looked up at him and said, with the directness she had always had, "I know that, Daddy." "Okay," he said. "Okay," she said, and went back to the animals. 3 days later, Camille's things were gone. She was thorough about it. She'd taken everything that was hers and left nothing behind that was hers, which was the kind of clean exit that required a particular discipline and also told you something about a person. The closet where her garment bags had hung was empty. The cosmetics case was gone from the bathroom counter. The playlist she had set up on the portable speaker was still there. He deleted it, not out of bitterness, just because hearing it would have been a strange kind of haunting. He walked through the house after she'd gone. Leia was napping. Mrs. Okafor was in the kitchen. He walked through the rooms the way you walk through a space after it's changed, trying to take its measure, trying to understand what it was now compared to what it had been. The house was quiet, not empty. It was Leia's house, which meant it could never fully feel empty. Her drawings were on the refrigerator. Her shoes were by the front door. Peanut had been temporarily left on the living room couch and was presiding over the space with one misaligned eye. But the quality of the quiet was different. He stood in the sitting room where the gathering had been, where 12 people had sat with their drinks and their conversations and had fallen silent when a little girl walked in wearing a blue dress, and he stood there for a while. He thought about what Leia had done in that moment, the stillness of it, the simplicity. She hadn't yelled, she hadn't cried, she hadn't run to him. She had just pointed, had trusted that the pointing would be enough, had trusted that her father would look in the right direction if she showed him where to look. She had been right. That was the thing he was sitting with, the thing he was still not entirely sure how to hold. She had been right to trust him. Not because he had been doing well, he hadn't, not for months, but because when she pointed, he had finally looked. And that had been enough to start the rest of it. He wasn't sure that was something he'd earned, but he was going to spend a long time trying to earn it going forward, which was, he supposed, the best any of them could do. He went to the living room, picked Peanut up from the couch, and took him upstairs to put him back in Leia's room where he belonged. The first week after Camille left was strange in a way that Darian hadn't anticipated. He had expected relief. He had expected the house to breathe differently, and in some ways it did. The particular tension that had been living in the walls, the low-frequency hum of something not quite right, that was gone. But what replaced it wasn't the clean open space he'd imagined. It was something more complicated, a kind of stillness that had weight to it. He moved through the rooms and felt the absence not of Camille specifically, but of the version of the future he had been building around her. The imagined dinners, the imagined mornings, The imagined shape of a life that had more people in it than just him and Leia and Mrs. Okafor. He had wanted that shape. He had wanted it badly enough that he'd held on to it longer than he should have, and now it was gone. And the wanting was still there even though the thing he'd been wanting it with was not. He didn't talk about it to anyone, which was his pattern. He had a few close friends, Marcus, who he'd known since graduate school and who called every couple of weeks, and a colleague named Petra, who had been with Rayhan Technologies almost from the beginning, and who was one of the only people at the company who talked to him like a person rather than a boss. He didn't call Marcus. He didn't say anything to Petra beyond what work required. He went to the office and came home and sat with Leia in the evenings and ran in the mornings and told himself he was fine, which was not the same as being fine but was a reasonable facsimile. Leia, for her part, adapted with the uncomplicated flexibility of a small child who has not yet been taught that change is something to resist. She noticed Camille's absence. He could see that. There were a couple of moments in the first few days when she looked toward the kitchen at a time Camille might have been in it, and then looked away without saying anything. Once she asked Mrs. Okafor where the lady's coat had gone. Camille had had a coat she kept on the hook near the front door, a dark wool thing. And Mrs. Okafor had said calmly that the lady had taken it with her, and Leia had said, "Oh," and gone back to what she was doing. That was it. No tears, no extended questions, no visible grieving, which should have been a relief and mostly was, except that Darian found himself watching for it, watching for some sign that she was carrying something she wasn't showing him, and not being entirely sure how to read the absence of it. He asked Mrs. Okafor one afternoon, trying to make it casual. "Has she said anything about Camille not being here?" Mrs. Okafor was folding a small pair of leggings from the laundry. She folded it once, then again, precise as always. "She asked me if the lady was coming back." "What did you tell her?" "I told her no, that sometimes people live in different places and that was what was happening." "How did she take it?" She nodded. Mrs. Okafor paused with the leggings in her hands. "And then she asked if you were still going to be here." He stood with that for a second. "What did you say?" "I said absolutely yes." She set the leggings on the pile. She seemed satisfied with that. He understood then that the grief, if there was any, was not about Camille. It was about the underlying instability, the worry that things changed, that people left, that the world shifted without warning. Camille's absence was not a loss in the way Sophia's absence had been a loss. Camille had been a presence. Leia was still figuring out when she stopped being present. What Leia needed to know was not that Camille was gone, but that the constant thing, the one fixed point in her world, was still there. He made a decision that evening. He picked up the phone and called Marcus. Marcus answered on the second ring, the way he almost always did, and said, "I was starting to think you'd fallen into a server farm." "I've been—" Darian stopped. He was sitting at the kitchen table, and through the window he could see the last of the daylight going out of the sky, which happened early this time of year. "Things have been complicated." There was a brief pause that contained a lot of Marcus knowing not to push. "Okay," he said. "Tell me." So Darian told him. Not all of it. Not the drawing, not the conversation with Mrs. Okafor, not the particular quality of standing in the hallway holding a worn stuffed elephant while the party continued below, but the shape of it. Camille, the engagement, the gathering, the end of it. Marcus listened. He was good at listening, which was part of why Darian had kept him close for going on 15 years. Darian finished, Marcus was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "How are you doing, actually?" "I'm okay, I think." Darian rubbed the back of his neck. "I feel like I should be more okay than I am. I made the right call. I know I made the right call. Making the right call doesn't mean it doesn't cost something. I know." "And Leia?" "She's good. She's better than I expected, honestly. Better than I am, probably." They deal with what's in front of them. They don't spend as much time on the version of things that didn't happen. A pause. "You should let yourself deal with it too, Dee, not just manage it." "I know." "Do you, though?" Darian was quiet. "When's the last time you actually sat still with something hard instead of putting it in a file and coming back to it later?" "That's a very therapy-sounding question." "I've been in therapy for 4 years. It comes naturally now." He could hear the low humor in it, the warmth underneath. You don't have to have it all figured out. You know that, right? You can just be a guy who had a rough year and made a hard call and doesn't fully know what comes next. That's not the most comfortable way to exist. No, Marcus said, but it's honest. They talked for another 20 minutes about nothing in particular. A trip Marcus was planning, a problem at his firm, an argument Marcus had had with his brother that was funny in retrospect. And by the time they hung up, Darian felt something in his chest that had been pulled taut for days, finally eased by a few degrees. Not fixed, just eased, which was sometimes all you could reasonably ask for. November arrived with the kind of cold that settled in hard and early, stripping the oak trees bare before the month was a week old. The fountain in the courtyard now looked even more forlorn under the gray sky, and Darian put in a call to a landscaping company about getting it either repaired or removed, because he kept looking at it, and it kept looking back at him like a question he hadn't answered. He threw himself into work with the particular focus of a man who needs something to hold his concentration, and the acquisition gave him plenty. There were 2 weeks in November that required him to be in back-to-back negotiations, and he came home those evenings wrung out and sat with Leia for whatever time he could manage before she went to bed, and then sat at his desk and kept going. Petra noticed. She came into his office one afternoon with 2 cups of coffee and put one on his desk and sat down across from him, which she only did when she had something she wanted to say that wasn't work. "You look like you're trying to outrun something," she said. "I'm trying to close this deal." "You're trying to close this deal and also outrun something." She wrapped both hands around her cup. She was 46, with a direct, unhurried manner that he'd come to rely on without realizing it was happening. "You want to tell me? Or are we doing the thing where we pretend this is just a busy quarter?" He leaned back in his chair. "I ended the engagement." She nodded slowly. She didn't say she was sorry. She said, "When?" "About 3 weeks ago." "And you're just telling me now?" "I'm telling you now." She looked at him in the considering way she had. "Was it the right call?" "Yes." "Then you'll be okay." She said it simply, not as a comfort exactly, more as a statement of the expected outcome. "It's going to be messy for a while, but you'll be okay." "Leia's doing well," he said. He wasn't sure why he said it. It wasn't a response to what she'd said, but she took it naturally. "Of course she is. She's got you." She paused. "And Mrs. Okafor, which honestly probably doesn't hurt." He almost smiled at that. "Let people help you, Darian," Petra said, standing. "Not just with the company. I know it's not your natural habit, but try." She picked up her coffee cup. "And fix the thing with the fountain. I drove past your house last week and it's depressing." He did fix the fountain, or rather, he had someone come out to assess it, and then had someone else come out to actually do the repair, and by the 3rd week of November it was running again. A low, steady sound of water that he hadn't heard since the year after Sophia died. He hadn't fixed it then because it had seemed like too small a thing to spend energy on. Now he stood in the courtyard in the cold and listened to it and thought it was not a small thing at all. Leia heard it from inside and came to the window and pressed her face against the glass to look, and then appeared at the front door in her blue dress and socks with no shoes, which Mrs. Okafor immediately appeared behind her to address. "I want to see," Leia said. "Shoes first," Mrs. Okafor said. There was a brief negotiation that Leia lost, as she generally did with Mrs. Okafor on matters of physical safety, and she returned with her small rain boots on, yellow, with frog faces on the toes. And she came and stood next to her father at the fountain and looked at the water. "It's working," she said. "Yeah. It was broken before." "For a while." She considered the water for a moment, watching it move. "Did you fix it?" "I had someone help me fix it." She seemed to think this was a reasonable approach. "I'm glad," she said, in the particular way she said things she meant completely. He reached down and took her hand, and they stood there for a minute in the cold. And it was an ordinary moment, unadorned, a man and a small child looking at water in a courtyard while their breath made small clouds in the air. And it was also one of the better moments he'd had in months. December came with Christmas approaching, which meant a new set of logistics, what Leia might want, what the house should look like for the holiday, whether to travel or stay. Mrs. Okafor had family she usually went to for Christmas week, which she had always done and which Darian had always accommodated. And this year he wanted to make sure he'd planned enough ahead of time not to need coverage. He and Leia could manage a week alone together without difficulty. The thought of it was, Actually, not daunting, but something closer to appealing. He asked Leia what she wanted for Christmas in the way that felt honest to how she actually communicated, which was not making a list with her sitting at a table but catching her during play. She was in the living room with her wooden animals, rearranging them the way she frequently did, exploring new theories of size and proximity. He sat on the floor near her and watched. "Hey, Bug." Christmas is coming." She looked up with slightly more interest than she'd shown about the fountain. "I know. Is there something you want?" She thought about this with the seriousness she gave to things she was actually considering. She lined up the small wooden duck at the end of the row. "A new elephant," she said. He looked at Peanut, who was currently leaning against the armchair leg nearby. "A friend for Peanut?" "Peanut is old," she said, with the matter-of-fact bluntness of someone who loved something very much and could still see it clearly. "He needs a friend." "Okay, what else?" She thought for another moment. "I want to put pictures on the wall." She said this with some emphasis, as if she'd been thinking about it and had decided to make it official. "My pictures. In the hallway." He looked at the hallway in question. It had art on it, 3 framed prints that a decorator had selected years ago, abstract, the kind of thing that cost more than it communicated. "Your drawings?" "In frames," she specified, "like real ones." He looked at her. "Yeah," he said. "We can do that." She went back to the animals, satisfied. He stayed on the floor a moment longer. He bought Peanut's friend, a gray elephant of similar vintage and softness, ordered from a small toy shop that still made that style of stuffed animal. And he had the 3 abstract prints taken down from the hallway and gave Leia the significant task of choosing which of her drawings would go up in their place. This process took 2 days and enormous seriousness, involving multiple rounds of candidate selection, reconsideration, and one firm rejection of a drawing she had previously been proud of on the grounds that it didn't look right anymore. In the end, she chose 5 drawings, which were professionally framed at a shop in town. The woman behind the counter had not blinked at framing children's crayon drawings, which Darian appreciated, and hung in the hallway in a row. Leia stood in front of them for a long time when they went up. "They look real," she said. "They are real." She looked at him. "I mean, like real art." "They are real art." She appeared to be working out whether this was just him being nice versus a statement of fact. She turned back to the drawings on the wall and looked at them a while longer. The middle one, slightly larger than the others, was a house with a tree and a bird. The house from weeks ago. She had chosen it. He had let her choose without influence, and she had chosen it. He did not point this out. He just stood next to her and looked at it. "The bird is good," he said. "I know," she said. Christmas that year was quieter than previous years had been, but not lonely. Darian's parents were in Florida and called on the morning of Christmas Eve, which was their tradition, and his mother talked to Leia for 12 minutes, which was about 10 minutes longer than she usually talked to adults. And Leia told her about the new elephant in careful detail, and his mother, to her credit, asked follow-up questions about the elephant rather than moving on. His sister called from Seattle. Marcus sent a package that arrived on Christmas Eve and contained a book for Darian and a set of art supplies for Leia. Good ones, not the drugstore variety, which told Darian that Marcus had been paying attention to more than the conversation they'd had. On Christmas morning, Leia came into his room at 6:43, which was earlier than he would have liked, but not as early as he'd feared, and she stood beside the bed and poked his shoulder until he opened his eyes. "It's Christmas," she said. "I know. You have to get up. Give me 1 minute." She gave him 45 seconds. They went downstairs together, her hand in his, her feet in the frog-faced boots, because she liked them and had decided they were appropriate for the occasion despite his mild protest. Under the tree there were a handful of things. He hadn't gone overboard, deliberately, because he didn't want the morning to be about volume, and she went through them with the focused attention she gave everything, which was the best kind of attention. The elephant, when she found it, got a long, wordless look of assessment. She picked it up. She felt its ears. She turned it over to check the bottom, which was something she did with stuffed animals, and which he had never been able to fully explain. Then she held it out toward Peanut, who was sitting nearby, as if making a formal introduction. "Peanut," she said, "this is your friend." Peanut appeared to receive this news with equanimity. She set the new elephant next to Peanut and went to the next thing, and Darian sat on the floor with his coffee and watched his daughter open Christmas presents and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Not happiness exactly, because happiness suggested something complete, and what he felt was much more unfinished than that. It was more like the beginning of something. The sense of having come through a stretch of difficult ground and being able to see, even if not clearly, that the ground ahead looked different. He was not fixed. He was still tired in the way that grief makes you tired. Not always and not overwhelmingly, but structurally, in the way that something important having been removed from your architecture means the whole thing has to relearn how to bear weight. He was still sometimes standing at the kitchen counter at 7 in the morning, wondering what the next few years actually looked like. He still sometimes drove home from the office and sat in the car in the driveway for 2 or 3 minutes before going inside. Not because he didn't want to go in, but because he needed those minutes to put down what the day had been and pick up what the evening needed. But he was doing it. He was there. He was present in the house, and present with his daughter, and present enough with himself to understand mostly what he was feeling and why, which was more than he'd been able to say 6 months ago. After the presents were opened and the floor was scattered with wrapping paper, and Laya had decided to give both elephants a bath in her toy sink, which was a small plastic thing that didn't actually produce water but apparently served adequately for the ritual purposes she had in mind. Darian picked up the wrapping paper from the floor and made coffee and put some music on low, and the morning moved forward the way good mornings do, not with anything notable in it, just with its own quiet forward motion. I was washing the mugs after breakfast when Leia appeared in the kitchen doorway. She was holding both elephants by the ears, one in each hand, carrying them the way children carry things they're responsible for transporting. "Daddy," she said. "Yeah, Bug. What's the new elephant's name?" He turned off the water and dried his hands. He thought about it. "I don't know. That might be your call." She looked at the new elephant. She looked at Peanut. She looked at the new elephant again. "Walnut," she said. He looked at her. "Walnut." "Because Peanut," she said, in the tone of someone explaining something self-evident. "That's," he started. "It's a good name," she said firmly. "It's a great name," he agreed. She went back down the hallway, Peanut and Walnut swinging from her hands, and he stood at the kitchen sink and listened to her feet on the floor. That particular sound, small and solid and real. And outside the window, the oak trees stood bare against the winter sky, and the fountain in the courtyard moved quietly beneath a thin layer of cold, and the hallway held 5 framed drawings in a row, and the house was his daughter's house, and it was full of her. He put his hands in the dishwater and finished the mugs, and didn't try to name what he was feeling because some things, he had come to understand, communicated themselves better without being named. You just felt them. You let them be what they were, and you stayed. January came in gray and cold and stayed that way for most of the month, the kind of winter that didn't dramatic about itself. No heavy snow, no ice storms, just a steady, low-grade chill that settled into everything and made the mornings feel longer than they were. Darian ran anyway. He ran with his collar up and his hands in gloves and his breath making small clouds ahead of him on the road, and he ran the same route he'd been running for 3 years. Down the curved road, left at the bottom, through the neighborhood with the old colonial houses, around the park, back up. And he ran it because his back needed it, and because the physical therapist had told him so, and also because those 35 minutes in the morning were the only 35 minutes of any given day when nobody needed anything from him. He was not a man who had learned gracefully how to need things for himself. That was something he'd understood about his own character for a long time, without being particularly moved to change it. He was better at identifying what other people needed and providing it than he was at locating his own requirements and making them known. Sophia had understood this. She had worked around it and also occasionally called him on it, in the direct way she had. She would say, sometimes, in the middle of an ordinary evening, "You're doing the thing where you disappear into being useful." And he would say, "I'm not disappearing." And she would say, "You're 3/4 gone right now, I can tell." And she was always right, and he had loved her for being right about him in that way. He thought about her on those morning runs more than he thought about her at other times. Something about the movement and the cold air and the absence of any task to complete made her more available to him. He would be running past the park, and something about the angle of the light or the smell of the air would bring her up clearly, not as grief, not as that familiar ache that had been the first shape of losing her, but as something more like presence. Like she was running a few steps behind him, not keeping up because she needed to, but because she wanted to be there. He knew this was his own mind making something out of the need to make something. He knew that. But he didn't try to talk himself out of it, because it didn't hurt anything, and it made the runs less solitary. It was on one of those January mornings, about 10 days into the new year, that everything shifted again. He came back from his run and found Mrs. Okafor in the kitchen with Leia, who was eating toast with the particular concentration she gave to toast. She had opinions about toast, about how much butter and how evenly it was distributed, and she would eat it methodically, edge to edge, which was unusual for a child her age, and which Mrs. Okafor had long since stopped commenting on. The morning was ordinary. It was completely ordinary. And then Mrs. Okafor said, "Mr. Rehan, I found something when I was cleaning the guest room yesterday." He looked up from pouring his water. "What kind of something?" She reached into the front pocket of her apron and produced an envelope. Plain white, letter size, slightly soft from having been handled. It had his name on the front in handwriting he recognized immediately, in the way you recognize handwriting that you spent years reading. Notes left on the kitchen counter, margins of books, the cards that came with birthday gifts, the particular slant and spacing that is as individual as a voice. He took it from her without speaking. It was Sophia's handwriting. The envelope said Darian in blue pen, careful letters, the way she wrote when she was writing something she wanted to be clear. Mrs. Okafor said quietly, "It was taped to the back of the top shelf in the closet, behind the extra linens." A pause. "I think it's been there a while." He looked at the envelope. His heart was doing something unusual, not racing, more like slowing, the way things slow when your body recognizes that something requires your full attention. "Okay," he said. His voice came out even. He took the envelope to his office. He sat down at his desk. He set it in front of him and looked at it for a moment. Not dramatic about it, just taking a breath, because he had learned from experience that when you open something you cannot unopen, it's worth a moment's pause. He opened it. There were 3 pages, handwritten, the same blue pen. The date at the top was from 4 years ago, which meant she had written it during the 2nd year of her illness. After Leia was born, after they had understood that the trajectory was not going to change. In that period when Sophia had done the thing she always did, which was to look at what was coming and prepare for it with the same methodical, unsentimental care she brought to everything. He read it. He read it twice. The first time he read it, he took it in the way you take in something that hits too directly, processing the words but not fully inside them. The second time, he let himself be inside them, and it was the second reading that undid him, quietly, sitting alone in his office with the winter light coming through the window. She had written about him first, about the specific ways he was good and the specific ways he was difficult, and she had written about both with such accuracy and such lack of sentimentality that reading it was like looking in a mirror that had no interest in flattering you. She had written, "You are the most capable person I know, and also one of the loneliest, and for a long time I thought those 2 things were separate, but I think now they come from the same place. The part of you that believes the best thing you can offer someone is your competence. It's not, Dee. It's close, but it's not it." He sat with that for a moment. She had written about Leia. She had written, and this was the part that moved through him in a way he felt in his whole body, that she had known from very early that Leia was a particular kind of child, that the perceptiveness was there from the start, the watchfulness, the way she would lock eyes with people and look at them without any of the social discomfort that usually makes sustained eye contact difficult. Sophia had written, "She came into the world already paying attention. I don't know what that means for her exactly, but I know it means she's going to see things clearly that other people miss, and that it's going to be both her strength and her hard thing. She'll see pain before it announces itself. She'll know when someone is pretending. She'll carry more of the room's feeling than her share. Watch for that. It can get heavy." He thought about a 3-year-old hiding a drawing under a mattress. He thought about a 3-year-old going quiet in rooms rather than adding to what the adults were already carrying. He thought about a 3-year-old pointing at him across a full room because she had decided her father needed to see something. Sophia had seen all of this before it happened. She had seen it in the infant who looked at faces with that particular attention, and she had written it down and sealed it in an envelope and put it somewhere she trusted would eventually be found. The last section of the letter was addressed to him directly, about the future, about the years ahead. And she had not told him what to do. She had never been that way, never interested in telling people what to do. But she had said, I know you're going to want to fix things. You're going to want to build something complete, something that looks finished from the outside. But I think what Laya needs from you isn't a finished thing. I think she just needs you to keep showing up unfinished, the way you actually are, so she can see that unfinished doesn't mean broken. She needs you to be real with her more than she needs you to be whole. And then, at the end, in handwriting that was slightly less even, he thought maybe she had been tired when she wrote this part, or maybe it had just taken more out of her. You're already the father she needs. You have been from the day she arrived. I know you don't believe that, but I need you to write it down somewhere you'll find it and read it when you forget. You are exactly what she needs. You are enough. He sat in his office for a long time. He was not a man who cried easily. He had cried at the funeral, which was appropriate, and he had cried twice in the year after. Once in the car, coming back from the grocery store of all places, because they'd had Sophia's brand of sparkling water on sale, and he'd put it in the cart before he remembered, and once late at night when he'd found one of her cardigan sweaters at the back of the closet, and it had still smelled like her. 2 times in 2 years, which was not repression exactly, more just the particular shape of how his grief moved. Not in waves the way people talked about it, more in sudden stillnesses where it found him when he wasn't defended against it. He cried now. He sat in his office with 3 pages of his dead wife's handwriting in his hands, and he cried with the specific relief of someone who has been carrying something unwitnessed for a very long time and has finally put it down in front of someone who could see it. Even if that someone was not present, even if the witness was a letter and a memory and a winter morning alone. The crying wasn't about losing her. That grief was older and had been lived with long enough to have a texture to it, a shape he'd learned to move around. This was something else. This was about being known, about someone having seen him clearly enough to write down the truest things about him, to seal them away, and to trust that he would eventually be in a place where he could receive them. He folded the letter carefully along its original lines. He put it back in the envelope. He sat with it in his hands for a while longer, not reading, just holding, and then he put it in the top drawer of his desk where he kept the things he needed to be able to reach. He went back to the kitchen. Mrs. Okafor looked at him once and then looked away in the understanding way she had, and she poured him a cup of coffee without being asked, and set it near him and got Laya interested in something on the other side of the kitchen so that he had a moment to collect himself at the counter. He stood at the counter and drank his coffee and looked out at the courtyard where the fountain moved quietly in the cold air, and he thought about what Sophia had written. Not with the intensity of those first minutes in the office, but with a kind of quiet sitting with it. He was already the father Laya needed. She had said so. She had written it down. And the thing about Sophia was that she had been precise in everything she said. She did not offer reassurances she didn't mean. She did not make promises she hadn't thought through. If she had written that, she had written it because she believed it to be true, and she had known him well enough that her belief was not uninformed. He had not been doing it perfectly. He had missed things. He had been distracted and had managed from a distance when he should have been present, and he had taken too long to see what was happening in his own house. All of that was true. But when the moment had come, when Laya had raised her hand across that room and pointed at him, he had looked. He had turned in the right direction, and everything that happened after that had come from that turning. Maybe that was what enough looked like. Not flawless, not finished, just turning in the right direction when the moment asked for it. He thought about Laya's words on the floor with the wooden animals. The big one looks after the little one. Self-evident, she had said. Yes, Daddy. He thought about her hiding the drawing under the mattress, protecting him, at 3 years old, from the sadness of understanding what she hadn't drawn. He thought about the way she had come to him after Camille's last night, not with any of the fear or confusion she must have been carrying, but with Peanut extended in her small hands like an offering, because she had sensed that he was the one who needed something held. She had been looking after him. That was what Mrs. Okafor had said, and it had broken something open in him when he heard it, and it still had weight now that he'd had months to sit with it. A child who had been barely out of infancy, who had lost a mother she had not had long enough to fully know, had spent the better part of the past year finding quiet ways to be careful with her father's fragile places. He was going to spend the rest of her childhood finding ways to make sure she didn't have to do that anymore. Not because caretaking was wrong, she would always be that child, the one who noticed, the one who felt the room's temperature before anyone announced it. That was her. But she should be doing it from a place of safety, not from a place of worry. She should be paying attention to the world because she was curious about it, not because she was managing it. That was the work. That was what the next years looked like from where he stood. February brought something unexpected. Leia started talking about her mother. It hadn't happened much before. She had no real memory of Sophia. She'd been barely 18 months old when Sophia died, and what a child that age retains is impressionistic at best, more sensation than narrative. But she had started asking questions that winter, small ones at first, worked into ordinary conversations without ceremony. They'd be doing something, eating dinner, reading the bedtime book for the 30-something consecutive night, walking to the car. And she would say something like, "Mama like this weather?" Or, "Did Mama know Mrs. Okafor?" He answered every question. He had been careful, from the beginning, to keep Sophia in the house. Photographs on the shelves, the small stories told naturally, the blue dress available whenever Leia wanted it. He hadn't wanted her to grow up in a house where her mother was an absence that people moved carefully around. But these questions were something more than the general awareness. She was building something, piecing something together, and she was using him and Mrs. Okafor and the photographs and the dress and whatever impressions lived in her earliest experience as the materials. One evening in February, she was sitting in his lap while he read to her, and she had peanut and walnut arranged on the arm of the chair in a way she considered appropriate. And in the middle of the story, she said, without preamble, "Mama would have liked this book." He stopped reading. "Yeah," he said, "she would have. It was exactly the kind of book she liked." Leia looked at the illustrations for a moment. "Was she funny?" He felt something warm move through him. "Very funny. Funnier than me." "That's not hard," Leia said. He looked down at her. Was that a joke?" She had a small, private smile working at the corner of her mouth. She looked very much like Sophia at that moment. The exact same corner of the mouth, the same way of finding something funny while pretending she hadn't said anything. "Keep reading," she said. He kept reading, but he stayed inside that moment for a long time after, the weight of his daughter in his lap, peanut and walnut on the armchair, the winter evening outside the window, and somewhere in the shape of Leia's face, the particular presence of someone he had loved and lost and was still, in ways he couldn't fully account for, finding. March came, and with it the acquisition finally closed. The deal that had occupied months of his professional life was done, signed, announced, integrated into the company's structure. And the relief of it was physical, a loosening across his shoulders that he noticed in the shower the morning after and recognized as the release of something he'd been carrying without registering its weight. He took the team out to dinner. He gave a speech that he hadn't over-prepared. He said thank you, and he meant it, and he didn't dress it up. And Petra caught his eye from across the table with a look that said, "See, you can do that." Spring came slowly, the way it does in that part of the country, not as a dramatic arrival, but as a gradual accumulation. A week of temperatures 5 degrees warmer than the week before. A morning when the light had a different quality to it. The wildflower beds along the east wall of the house came up tentatively at first, then with more confidence. And one Saturday morning, Leia appeared at his bedroom door at 7, with her rain boots already on, and announced that they were going outside. "Now?" he said. "The flowers are happening," she said, with the gravity this apparently deserved. He put on his shoes and went outside with her, and she walked along the wildflower beds with the focused attention of a botanist making field notes. And she would crouch down to look at something, and then stand up and move 3 steps and crouch down again, and Peanut was tucked under one arm for the duration. He walked behind her and kept his hands in his pockets and watched her. She had grown. He was always slightly startled when he noticed how much she'd grown, because she was a constant presence, and constant presences change so gradually that you can miss the accumulation until something makes it sudden. A pair of pants that no longer fit, a doorframe height mark that was already lower than her head. She was taller. Her face was longer. She still held Peanut the same way, with that same particular grip, but the arm holding him was less stubby than it used to be, the hands less round. She stopped in front of a cluster of small yellow flowers and looked at them for a while. "Daddy," she said. "Yeah." "Do you think Mama knew about these flowers?" He came and crouched down beside her, looking at the flowers. These specific ones? I don't know. She might have planted them, actually. She used to do things in the garden and not tell me about them and then act like it was obvious they'd been there. Leia appeared to find this funny and reasonable in equal measure. She didn't tell you? She said I didn't ask enough questions about the garden. You don't, Leia agreed. He looked at her sideways. You're 4 years old and you're taking her side. She was right, Leia said simply, and went back to looking at the flowers. He stayed crouched beside her for a moment. The morning was cool but getting warmer. The fountain was running in the courtyard. Somewhere in the oak trees, which were just starting to come back into leaf, a bird was doing something complicated and specific. I want to tell you something, he said. She looked at him. I want you to know that I wasn't always paying enough attention last year. He wasn't going to oversimplify it or dress it up. She was 4, but she was Leia, and Leia deserved the real thing. I was managing a lot, and I let some things get past me that I shouldn't have. And you were handling things on your own that you shouldn't have had to handle alone. She looked at him with those eyes that had always taken everything in. She didn't say anything. I'm sorry about that, he said. And I want you to know that if something ever feels wrong or if something's bothering you, you can tell me. Even if you think it might make me sad. I'm your dad. Sad is something I can handle. She was quiet for a moment. The bird in the oak tree continued its complicated work. Then she said, I know, Daddy. Okay, he said. She reached over and took his hand, small hand, his hand, the same way she'd taken it at the fountain in November, and she looked back at the yellow flowers. They're pretty, she said. Yeah, he said. They are. They stayed there a while, the two of them, in the spring morning, while the garden did what gardens do when the season finally turns, and everything that has been waiting underground decides its time. He had been thinking lately about what Sophia had written, about being real rather than whole, about showing up unfinished. He had spent most of his adult life trying to be the solved version of himself, the version with the answers already worked out, the edges filed, the difficult parts translated into something more manageable to present to the world. It was exhausting, and it was also, he understood now, unnecessary. His daughter did not need the solved version. She needed him. She needed the man who sat on a footstool too small for him because it was at her level, who held a worn stuffed elephant in a hallway not knowing what to do next, who ran in the January cold and thought about his dead wife, and let himself feel the particular specific shape of missing her without turning it into something useful. She needed the real thing. And the real thing was, it turned out, already there. Somewhere in the long, complicated year just past, in the gathering and its aftermath, in the kitchen conversations and the late nights, and the drawing under the mattress, and the Christmas morning with the 2 elephants and Sophia's letter in his hands, something had settled. Not resolved, not completed, not wrapped up in the clean way that completion suggests. Just settled. The way ground settles after a disruption, not back to what it was before, but into a new arrangement that was stable, that could hold weight, that was ready for what came next. In the hallway of the house, 5 framed drawings hung in a row. The yellow house with the tree and the bird in the corner. A drawing of 2 elephants that she'd made after Christmas, Peanut and Walnut together, rendered in gray and pink with careful attention to the size difference between them. A drawing of the fountain, which she had described to him as the water thing in the front, and which was unmistakably a fountain if you knew what you were looking at. A drawing of Mrs. Okafor, who had been rendered in purple for reasons Leia had not explained, and which Mrs. Okafor had accepted with dignified grace. And the one in the center, slightly larger than the others, in the place of most prominence, the yellow construction paper drawing that had once been hidden under a mattress, the one that said "Me and Papa" in labored block letters, 2 figures close together with a small gray shape between them. It hung there now in a real frame, under real glass, on a real wall. Not hidden, not protected against being seen, just there, in the open, which was where it had always belonged. He walked past it every morning on the way to the kitchen. Sometimes he stopped and looked at it. Most mornings he just walked past it the way you walk past things you love that have become part of the ordinary texture of your days, with the peripheral awareness that they are there, that they belong, that their presence is something you are fortunate to have. There is a thing that happens to people who lose someone central to their life, something nobody tells you about beforehand because it can't really be explained until you're inside it. You don't stop being the person you were when you were with them. The loss doesn't erase the years. You carry the version of yourself that existed in that relationship that was called into being partly by the presence of that particular person, and you carry it into the life that comes after. And sometimes it's a heavy thing to carry, and sometimes it's the most sustaining thing you have. Darian carried Sophia in the way he had learned to carry her, not as grief's weight, but as an inheritance. Her way of seeing him clearly, her trust that he was capable of the hard things, her voice in the back of his mind saying, "You're 3/4 gone right now," when he started to disappear into competence and management. Her letter in the top drawer of his desk that he had read enough times now that he could locate any line in it without looking, that had become a document he understood from the inside rather than received from the outside. And Laia carried her too, in the angle of her smile, in the focused way she looked at things, in the fact that she had arrived in the world already paying attention and had never stopped. She would grow up not remembering her mother in any concrete way, and that was a loss that Darian would always feel on her behalf, the specific sadness of something she hadn't had long enough to keep. But she would know Sophia through the stories, through the photographs on the shelves, through the blue dress that she still reached for on mornings when something in her wanted that particular comfort, through a father who loved her mother enough to keep her present rather than putting her away. That was what he could give her, not a replacement, not a finished family that looked complete from the outside. Just the truth, offered consistently, with as much honesty as a small person could hold at any given stage. That she came from love, that she was held by love, that the people who were supposed to be there were there. On a morning in late April, Laia found him in his office. He was at his desk, not working yet, just sitting with his coffee and looking at the spring light in the courtyard, the fountain, the oak trees in full leaf now. She came in without knocking, which she always did, and she climbed up into the chair beside his desk, the chair where clients and colleagues sat, which she had decided was hers when she came to visit him in here. And she settled herself with Walnut in her lap. Peanut, she had informed him recently, was staying in the room today, which meant she had tucked him in the bed before she came downstairs, a ritual that had been going on for some time and that Darian found more touching than he could explain. She looked around the office. She looked at his desk, the framed photo of Sophia on the corner of it, the small stack of papers, the coffee cup. "What are you doing?" she said. "Just thinking." "About what?" He looked at her. 4 years old, in her pajamas and the yellow socks with the stripes, Walnut in her lap, hair doing the thing it did in the mornings when she hadn't brushed it yet, completely herself. "About how lucky I am," he said. She considered this with appropriate seriousness. "You should write it down," she said, "so you don't forget." He looked at her. "Yeah?" "Mrs. Okafor writes things down," she said, as if this settled the logic of it. "So she doesn't forget." "That's a good point," he said. She seemed satisfied and looked back at the courtyard. She pointed at the fountain through the window. "It's working," she said. "Yeah," he said. "It is." She leaned back in the chair with Walnut and watched the water, and he watched the water too, and the morning opened up around them the way mornings do when there is nowhere you need to be that is more important than exactly where you are. The house on the curved road had a fountain that worked now. It had 5 drawings in frames in the hallway, and a nanny who had been there since the beginning and was not going anywhere. It had 2 stuffed elephants of complimentary names, and a blue dress that appeared on a small girl on mornings that called for it, and oak trees in the yard that had been there longer than anyone, and a father who ran in the cold and thought of his wife and came home and sat on footstools too small for him and read the same book 30-something nights in a row and was learning, slowly and imperfectly and without any particular grace, to be exactly where he was. He was not the version of himself that had everything managed and the future mapped and the shape of the life looking finished from the outside. He was the other version, the unfinished one, the one his daughter had pointed at across a room full of people and trusted to look in the right direction. He was looking. He intended to keep looking. That was enough. It was in the end the only thing that had ever been required of him. Not perfection, not completion, not a life that looked like what people imagined when they slowed down driving past a house on a curved road. Just presence. Just showing up with the whole complicated truth of who you were and staying and being willing to see. His daughter knew this already. She had known it, in some wordless way, since before she had the language to know anything. And every day, in the small, ordinary ways that don't announce themselves, a hand taken, a question answered, a drawing put up on a wall, a morning at a fountain, a chair pulled close, she had been trying to show him. He was finally able to say, with the quiet certainty of someone who has earned a small and unspectacular and completely sufficient truth, he understood. He wrote it down. Not that morning. That morning he stayed in the office chair with his coffee and his daughter and the fountain in the courtyard until she got restless and climbed down and went to find Mrs. Okafor and breakfast, because that was the natural order of a morning for Laya, and it didn't require modification. But later, after she was fed and occupied and the house was moving through its day, he came back to his desk and he opened the bottom drawer where he kept a legal pad he used for thinking that wasn't ready to be typed yet, and he picked up a pen. He didn't write a list. He wasn't making resolutions or drawing up plans. He just wrote what was true, in the plain way Sophia had always written things. Without dressing it up, without the self-consciousness that came from worrying how it sounded. He wrote, Laya is 4. She names stuffed animals by association. She puts Peanut to bed before she comes downstairs. She thinks I don't notice things about the garden. He wrote, I missed things last year that I shouldn't have missed. I'm paying attention now. He wrote, Sophia was right about most things. I should have told her that more often while I had the chance. He wrote, the fountain works. The drawings are on the wall. This is enough. This is actually enough. He put the pen down and read what he'd written and felt no particular need to add to it. It was not eloquent. It was not the kind of thing anyone would want to read. But it was true, completely true, and that made it more valuable to him than anything he could have polished into shape. He put the legal pad back in the drawer. Outside, he could hear Laya in the hallway talking to Mrs. Okafor about something with the particular urgency she brought to topics she considered important. He couldn't make out the words, but he could hear the rhythm of it. The quick declaration, the pause while Mrs. Okafor responded, the follow-up that was even more emphatic than the opening. He heard Mrs. Okafor laugh, a low, warm sound, and then Laya's laugh following it, and then feet on the floor moving toward the kitchen. He sat and listened to the sounds of his house, and did not try to make them into anything more than what they were. The spring moved forward. May brought warmth that was real rather than tentative, and the garden along the east wall came in fully. Not neat, not arranged, just growing in the way things grow when they've been there long enough to know the soil. Leia had developed strong opinions about which flowers were better than others, opinions that were not based on any identifiable logic, but were held with complete conviction, and she would walk the beds on weekend mornings and make her assessments and report them to Darian as if he were a junior colleague who needed to be kept informed. The purple ones are the best, she told him one Saturday. Better than the yellow? She gave him a look. Daddy, the yellow are good, the purple are the best. Those are different things. Got it, he said. Important distinction. She nodded, satisfied, and moved along to the next cluster. He had moments in those spring months where he would catch himself in the middle of an ordinary thing, making coffee, driving, walking behind Laya in the garden, and feel a wave of something that wasn't quite happiness and wasn't quite sadness, but was some combination of both, the specific bittersweet weight of being grateful for what you have, while being fully aware of what you lost in order to get here. He didn't push it away when it came. He had gotten better at that, at letting things be what they were, without immediately trying to resolve them into something more comfortable. Marcus came to visit in May, which he did once or twice a year, and he and Darian sat on the back porch on a Saturday evening while Laya ran around the yard with a level of sustained energy that Marcus regarded with something between admiration and disbelief. She doesn't stop, Marcus said. She stops eventually, around 8:30. And then you have the evenings to yourself? Darian thought about it. I have the evenings to myself from about 8:30 until I fall asleep at 10, which is my life now. Marcus raised his glass. Glamorous. Deeply. He watched Leia cut across the yard toward the garden, reconsidering something mid-route, turning back. I don't mind it, he said. I actually don't mind it. Marcus looked at him the way Marcus looked at people when he was deciding if they were telling the truth. You look better, he said, than the last time. I feel better, not all the way better, but better. That's all there is, Marcus said. There's no all the way. There's just the direction. Darian nodded. He thought about what Sophia had written, about being real rather than whole, about showing up unfinished. He had not told Marcus about the letter. He hadn't told anyone about the letter. It felt private in the way that certain things are private, not because they're shameful, but because they belong to a particular relationship, and sharing them too widely would dilute something essential about them. But he thought about it now, sitting on the porch, watching his daughter in the yard. She told me, he said. Sophia, in the letter. He paused. She said Laya was already who she was going to be, that she could see it before she had words for it. Marcus was quiet, listening. She said she saw it in the way Laya looked at people, the attention she paid. He stopped. She was right. You can see it in her every day. She's exactly who she was always going to be. Takes after her mother, Marcus said. Not a question. In some ways, he watched Leia stop at the garden's edge and crouch down to look at something low near the ground, a bug, maybe, or a new flower, or just something the garden was doing that she wanted to examine. In some ways, she's something else entirely, something I don't have a reference for yet. I'm still figuring out who she is as she becomes it. That's the whole job, Marcus said. Yeah, Darian said. Turns out. Leia stood up from her crouch and turned and yelled something across the yard, and it took him a second to parse it, but it was, Daddy, there's a beetle, a big one. Come see. He stood up. Marcus looked at him with a raised eyebrow. Mandatory, Darian said, and walked out into the yard to look at the beetle. It was, as advertised, a big one. Leia narrated its qualities with the authority of an expert. Its size relative to other beetles she had encountered, the specific shade of its shell, the way it was moving, which she described as serious, which was also exactly right. Darian crouched beside her and agreed with her assessments, and offered no counterpoints because she was correct about all of it. They were still crouched over the beetle when Mrs. Okafor appeared at the back door to say dinner was almost ready, and Leia said, Wait, with such intensity that Mrs. Okafor waited, patient as ever, while Leia finished her assessment and said a kind of informal goodbye to the beetle that it did not acknowledge and she did not require it to. Then she stood up, took her father's hand, and walked back toward the house. The evening light was doing the thing it did in May, long and golden, and coming in at an angle that made everything look like it was being noticed. The yard, the oak trees, the east wall with its wild garden, the fountain in the courtyard visible around the corner, a porch where Marcus sat with his drink, a back door where Mrs. Okafor stood, a house full of drawings in frames and 2 stuffed elephants, and a blue dress in a small girl's closet, and a letter in a desk drawer that said, You are exactly what she needs. Leia's hand was warm in his. She was already talking about dinner, about what she hoped it was, making her case for a particular outcome. He held her hand and listened and walked with her toward the lit-up house, and the spring evening came down around them soft and slow, and he was there for all of it. Not somewhere else, not managing the edges of it from a careful distance, not 3/4 gone. All the way there, present, paying attention. It turned out that was the thing she had been trying to show him all along, that evening in the sitting room when she raised her small hand in a room full of people and pointed at him without a word, not pointing to accuse, not pointing to ask for rescue, but pointing the way you point at something you want someone to see, something you need them to understand is right there, has been right there, waiting to be looked at. She had been pointing at her father. She had been saying, Here, this is what matters. Look. He was looking. He intended to keep looking for the rest of his life. Inside, dinner was on the table, and Marcus was already seated, and Mrs. Okafor was pouring water, and Leia was climbing into her chair with the focused athleticism she brought to all chair climbing, and the room was warm and lit and full of the sounds of an evening that was nothing special and completely irreplaceable. Darian stood in the doorway for just a moment before going in. He looked at the table, at his daughter settling herself, at the ordinary arrangement of plates and glasses and people. He thought of Sophia the way he often did in moments like this, not with the sharp ache of early grief, but with something quieter, more like gratitude. She had known this was waiting for him. She had written it down and sealed it away, and trusted that he would find his way to it. He had found his way to it, imperfectly, slowly, with wrong turns he would not pretend away. But he had found it. He walked into the room and sat down at the table with his daughter and his friend, and the woman who had held his family together when he didn't have the hands for it, and the evening continued, simple and whole, asking nothing of him except that he be there. He was there. She had arranged them before she fell asleep with the usual seriousness, and they were exactly where she'd put them, and she was exactly where she was supposed to be, and the room smelled like the lavender soap and the spring air coming through the window she'd asked to leave cracked open because she liked the outside sounds. He sat there longer than he needed to. Marcus had gone to bed in the guest room, the same guest room that had once held Camille's garment bags, and now held his old college friend with his noise-canceling headphones and the book he'd brought, and the easy comfort of someone who had been in and out of this house enough times that it didn't require any performance from either of them. Mrs. Okafor had gone home at her usual time. The house had settled into its nighttime self. He looked at his daughter's face in the dim light. The pillow crease would come, as it always did, the small parted lips, the absolute completeness of a sleeping child, the way sleep made her look like the most finished version of herself. Every complicated bit of her consciousness temporarily set down, just the breathing and the warmth and the fact of her continuing. He thought about the year. He thought about where they had been 12 months ago, the gathering, the room full of people, the small hand raised in the lamplight. He thought about all the ground between that moment and this one, how much of it had been hard, and how much of it he would not trade for anything. The conversations he should have had sooner and the ones he'd finally had. The letter in the desk drawer, the drawing in the frame, the fountain working again. I thought about a thing Sophia had said to him once, early in her illness, when they were still in the phase of believing that clarity was a gift rather than its own kind of weight. She had said, "Most people spend their whole lives trying to get to the place they were already standing." He hadn't understood it then. He thought he understood it now. He leaned down and kissed his daughter's forehead, light as possible, not enough to wake her. She didn't stir. "I see you, Bug," he said. Very quiet. Just for the room. Then he got up, careful with the mattress, and turned off the small lamp, and stood for one more moment in the dark doorway of his daughter's room, with the spring night coming in through the cracked window and the two elephants standing watch and everything, for now, exactly where it belonged.